Dangerous Game by William Harris. Penguin Readers, Level 3. Text copyright Pearson Education Limited 2000. Recording copyright Pearson Education Limited 2008. Not to be publicly performed, resold, hired, copied or re-recorded without written permission from the publishers. CD 1.
Chapter 1. I'll begin at the beginning. I don't know when the game began. My wife died 12 years ago, and the game began soon after that. But I can't remember exactly when. I continued to live in this house after she died. I still live here. It's a big house, but I don't want to move to a smaller place. I love this house and everything in it. You see, I haven't got many friends, and all the things in this house are important to me. I can't live without them. Sometime after my wife's death, I realized that my bedroom was haunted. It's the only room in the house that's haunted. One night, I suddenly realized there was a ghost in the room. I wasn't afraid, because this ghost was friendly. It was a happy ghost. I always wanted to laugh when it was in the room. You'll say it was my wife's ghost. I don't know. I always think of the ghost as he, not she. I named the ghost Poldy. I made up the name Poldy from the word poltergeist. You know that a poltergeist is a playful ghost. It likes to drop things on the floor. It likes to make a noise. It likes to throw things round the room. It likes to move your bed and to play games. Poldy was friendly and playful, so we made up a little game. We play it every night. We've played it for years now. In fact, I must always play the game before I go to sleep. I can't go to sleep if I don't play it. Poldy doesn't appear at midnight or anything like that. He's not that kind of ghost. He's always in the room. But he only appears when we play the game. Of course, I don't have to play the game, but I always want to play. I know Poldy does too. I'm writing this story because I want to tell you about this game. Nobody knows about it. My best friend, perhaps he's my only friend, doesn't know about it. I know about it, and Poldy knows about it, and that's all. It's our secret. But I'm talking too much. When you live alone, you're always talking to yourself. I must begin at the beginning. My name is William Harris. I'm 48 years old. Perhaps you've heard of me. I'm not famous, but many people have heard of me. You see, I'm a writer. I've written about 25 books. I write all kinds of stories. Love stories, detective stories, and, yes, ghost stories. But don't get the wrong idea. This isn't just another ghost story. This is different from any story that I've ever written. Why? Because it's a true story. Everything in this story has really happened. In fact, strange things are still happening. I'm not a famous writer, but my books sell quite well. I have the money to live in this nice house. I can live in the way that I want to live. I'm not rich, but I'm not poor either. I live simply. I've always lived simply. When my wife was alive, I didn't live very simply. We went out a lot. We had a lot of friends. Since she died, I don't go out very much. I like to stay at home and write my books. Just now I'm writing another detective story. My readers like my detective stories best. I made up the famous detective Filbert Wiley. Perhaps you've heard of him. Perhaps you've read one of my Filbert Wiley stories. I've stopped work on my new Filbert Wiley book to write this story. I have to write it now, while there's still time. But I must tell you something about myself first, and about my wife. Life was very different for me when she was alive. My wife's name was Julie. She was 2 years younger than I was. She was completely different from me. She liked to dance and sing. She liked to go to parties. Our house was always full of people in those days. "Put a suit on, William," she often said to me. I don't like suits. "Put a suit on" meant many things. Perhaps we were going out. Perhaps friends were coming to dinner. Perhaps we were having a party. I could never be sure. Anything could happen. I never knew about it before it happened. My life was in Julie's hands. Without her, I was nothing. I didn't want to meet the world, so Julie brought the world to me. It was a wonderful life. It was wonderful because Julie made it like that. All our friends were jealous of me. "Lucky old William," they often said. "Lucky man to have a wife like that. He's so quiet and so uninteresting, and she's so alive." Oh yes, they were jealous. You don't often see happy people, really happy people, I mean. And we were happy. That was our secret. Love was our secret. I loved Julie, and she loved me. Then suddenly, Julie became ill, very ill. I called the best doctors, but they couldn't do anything. I looked after her day and night, but in 2 short months, she was dead. Dead. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it after all these years. When she died, part of me died with her. Now she lives in my memory. I can't forget her, and will never forget her. I didn't want to look for another wife. Julie was my wife for 12 years, and now she's been dead for 12 years. Sadly, we never had any children, so when she died, I was alone. I shut myself in my house. I did nothing except work. At first, I wrote my books because I didn't want to think of my dear wife. The pain was too great. In time, things were a little better, but the pain has never really gone. I still feel it sharply when I think of Julie. She's still alive in my memory. Of course, I lost nearly all my friends, all those jealous friends. They liked Julie, but they didn't like me very much. Without Julie, I didn't go out. I didn't go to parties. I didn't ask other people to come to my house, and all my friends soon left me. Nobody was jealous of me. I wasn't lucky old William, just poor old William. Now, I have only one real friend. His name is Louis. He's a writer too, but I don't know anything about his books. I haven't read any of them. In fact, I haven't seen his books in any bookshop. Louis and I never talk about books. That's because we have the same interests. We both like chess. We have a game of chess once a week. Louis comes to see me every Wednesday. He always arrives at 8 o'clock in the evening, and we play chess for about 3 hours. Sometimes we play a number of games, sometimes only one. At about 11, Louis goes home, and I go to bed and play a different kind of game with Poldy. But I'll tell you about that later. Louis is really a very good friend. We play chess and never talk very much. Sometimes we don't say anything all evening. Good friends don't need to talk. Louis knows me very well, and I know him very well. We've been friends since we were students together. Louis was my friend before I met Julie. He knows a lot about me, but there are some things that he doesn't know. He'll be surprised when he reads this story. Louis and I have played chess together for years. He often came here when Julie was alive. Julie and I never went to parties on a Wednesday, because that was always my day. I must tell you that Louis will be here tomorrow. It's Tuesday today, Tuesday morning. I'm sitting at my desk in my study. I'm writing this story. The winter sun is shining through my study window. It's a beautiful day, but I don't want to go out. I never want to go out these days. Filbert Wiley is my only company. Just now I'm very tired, very, very sleepy, because I didn't sleep well last night. I played a game with Poldy, and it didn't end for a very long time. I'll tell you about this game, but not yet. Well, that's my life. It's a very simple life, and not a very interesting one, is it? How can life without Julie be interesting? Here I am, a middle-aged writer, alone in a big house. I have only one real friend in the world. I have my books. I have Filbert Wiley, the famous detective. Perhaps I lived through Filbert. I have my chess, and I have my memories. But it's not a sad life, and it's not a very quiet life. A lot happens in this house. There's a lot of noise and laughter. Because I have Poldy. And I haven't told you anything about Poldy yet. Poldy and laughter go together. I mean, they went together at first. I don't know when the game began. I've already told you that. I can't remember when I first met Poldy, but I can remember very clearly how I met him. I can remember the first time that he appeared, the first time that I realized he was in my bedroom. I can remember every detail. So I want to tell you about it in detail. My bedroom wasn't haunted when Julie was alive. Or perhaps it was, and I didn't realize it. I'll never know. Do you believe in ghosts? I've written a number of ghost stories, but they were only stories. I never believed in ghosts before. And I'm not sure I do now. But I know one thing. I'm sure there's a poltergeist in my bedroom. I can't say more than that. Here are a few details about my bedroom. You need to know them before I can tell my story. There's a big double bed in the room. Yes, it's the same double bed that Julie and I slept in. The head of the bed is against a wall. I sleep on one side of the bed. It's the same side that I've always slept on. There's a bedside table next to the bed. There's a bedside light on the table. There's a light socket near the floor. The light socket is for my bedside light. My light has a long cord. There's a plug at the end of the cord, and this plug goes into the light socket. Don't laugh at these details. They're all very important. You'll understand the reason soon. One dark winter night, I was reading in bed. It wasn't an interesting book, and I was very sleepy. I usually switch off the light when I want to go to sleep. My light has a small white switch. But that night, I didn't switch off the light in the usual way. I don't know why. Strangely, I reached over the side of the bed and pulled the plug out of the socket. Why did I do this? I still don't know. It was a funny thing to do. When I pulled the plug out, I suddenly wasn't sleepy. I was awake, really awake. The room was dark, completely black, but my eyes were wide open. My book fell to the floor. It hit the floor with a loud sound, but I didn't notice. I sat up in bed with my eyes open. I rested my back against the head of the bed. I looked into the dark room. Of course, I couldn't see anything. But just then, I knew there was someone in the room. I didn't know where in the room, but it, he, she was somewhere in front of me. Many minutes passed. I looked hard into the dark. I waited, but I still couldn't see anything. I wasn't afraid. The person in the room was very friendly. I was happy. I couldn't hear anything, but there was laughter in the air. "Who is it?" I called. "Who's there?" But there was no answer. I waited for a long time. The person in the room was a friend, a good friend. I wanted to meet this friend very much. If I switch on the light, perhaps I'll see him, I thought. I pressed the switch on my bedside light. I pressed it on and off, but nothing happened. Then I remembered. The plug wasn't in its socket, so I reached over the side of the bed and pushed the plug back into the socket. Suddenly, the light came on. The room was empty. I could feel it. I knew the person wasn't there. I pulled the plug out again and waited. Nothing. The room was still empty. I put the plug in, and the light came on again. There was still nobody there. I switched the light off from the light switch, but nothing happened. I was alone without my friend. I stayed awake for many hours. I thought, it's a poltergeist, and immediately the name Poldy came into my head. I called out, "Poldy! Poldy!" But he didn't come back. In the end, I fell asleep, but I knew something important was happening to me. This was my first meeting with the friendly ghost. My first meeting with Poldy. This was the beginning. Chapter 2. The Game. I woke up late the next morning. The cold winter sun was already up. My room was light. I sat up in bed and thought about the night before. Did those things really happen? Was it all a dream? I looked over the side of the bed. Yes, my book was on the floor. I looked at the light and the plug. Yes, the plug was in its socket. The details were right. I got up slowly. I washed and had breakfast. Then I went to my study. I was writing a detective story at the time, I remember. The adventures of Filbert Wiley soon filled my day, and I forgot about the adventures of the night before. I finished work early. I wasn't sleepy in the evening, but I went to bed earlier than usual, at about 10 o'clock. I sat in bed and thought about the night before. I didn't want to read, so I sat quietly with the light on. Then, very carefully, I switched it off from the light switch and waited. I looked into the dark room. Nothing happened. The room was empty. This is silly, I thought. I switched the light on again and got a book, an interesting one this time. I read for a long time and began to feel sleepy. I put my book on the bedside table. Then I wanted to switch the light off, but I didn't use the switch. I don't know why. Strangely, I reached over the side of the bed and found the cord. Then I found the plug and pulled it out of the socket. Immediately, I knew Poldy was there. The friendly ghost was somewhere in the room. "Poldy!" I called. There was no answer. I got out of bed and walked round the room. Poldy was there. I knew it. In the end, I went back to bed. I reached over the side and pushed the plug into its socket. The light came on. Poldy wasn't there. When I switched the light off again from the switch, he didn't come back. I switched the light on and off a number of times, but nothing happened. So I went to sleep. The next night, I made an important discovery. It was my first important discovery, the first of a number of discoveries. I went to bed at my usual time. I didn't read. I immediately switched off the light from the light switch and waited for Poldy, but he didn't appear. But when I pulled the plug out of the socket, he appeared, or I felt he was there. When I put the plug back in, he disappeared. This was my important discovery. Poldy never appeared when I used the light switch. He appeared only when I pulled the plug out. He appeared only once. When I put the plug back in, he disappeared. He didn't come back. I tried this the night after. I pulled the plug out when I went to bed. Poldy was there. I put it back and the light came on. Poldy wasn't there. I pulled the plug out again, but he didn't come back. After that, I put it back and pulled it out a number of times, but nothing happened. So I knew. Poldy came only once, when I pulled the plug out. He went away when I put it back. For many nights after that, I enjoyed Poldy's company. Sometimes I sat in the dark for hours with Poldy in the room. I enjoyed this very much. I could bring him into the room, or I could send him away with the light plug, but I could only do it once. I could keep the plug out of its socket for a long time. In that way I was able to enjoy Poldy's company for hours and hours. I was happy when Poldy was in the room. I often called to him, but he never gave me any sign of his presence. I could only feel his presence. There was no other sign. I never told anyone about Poldy. Louis came on Wednesdays and we played chess, but I never told him my secret. One Wednesday evening he said to me, "You're very well, William, always smiling and happy. It's nice to see you like this. Perhaps you have a secret life." I smiled and said nothing. It was true, of course. I had a secret life, but I didn't tell Louis about it. I know he's my best, my only friend, but I don't think he can understand things like this. I enjoyed Poldy's company in this way for nearly a year. Then, one night, something strange happened. I pulled the plug out, and Poldy was in my room. I was sitting in bed. I called out to him, "Poldy," and he gave me the first sign of his presence. I heard a knock. It came from the other side of the room. Then there was another knock. The knocks got louder and came nearer and nearer to my bed. Then the knocking stopped. I wasn't afraid. In fact, I laughed. Then the knocking began again. It moved away from my bed to the other side of the room. It was a strange knocking sound. How can I describe it? Well, it was like someone with a wooden leg. It was like a wooden leg on the floor. When a man walks with a wooden leg, you can hear a knock. Knock, 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 like that. I was very happy. At last, I had a sign from Poldy. I could feel he was there, and I could hear he was there. He's not afraid of me, I thought, so he's given me a sign. Every day, I worked in my usual way, but my life was different now. Every night, I enjoyed Poldy's company. He became more and more friendly. He gave me different signs of his presence. Sometimes he shook my bed. I laughed, and he shook it again. Or sometimes he shook a chair in my room. I could hear it on the floor. Or sometimes he threw things round the room. I couldn't see them in the dark, but I could hear them. Once, a hand mirror flew right past my face. Sometimes Poldy opened and shut my bedroom door. He did this very quickly a number of times. Sometimes he played little jokes. Once, I found my shirt in my bed. Another time, I found one of my shoes in my bed. I always laughed at these jokes. I think Poldy liked to hear laughter. He always knocked at the window or shook my bed. I tried hard to see him. I looked into the dark room, but I never saw anything. But I could feel his presence, and I could hear him. When I got tired of all these jokes, I pushed the plug back into its socket. The light came on, and Poldy went away. Then I always switched the light off and went to sleep. One night, I made my second important discovery. Poldy was in my room. He walked to my bed and away from it many times. He shook my bed and knocked at my door. In the end, I was very sleepy. I'll put the plug back in, I thought. The light will come on and Poldy will go away. Then I'll turn it off and go to sleep. I reached over the side of the bed and picked up the plug. Suddenly, Poldy pulled the cord and the plug flew out of my hand. I had to find it, and it wasn't easy, and I put it in the socket. But this was an important discovery. Poldy didn't just want to give me signs of his presence. He didn't just want to play little jokes. He wanted to play a game with me. In the end, we made up this game with the light plug. The rules of the game were very simple, but it took us a long time to make them up. the rules grew. They were like this. Rule 1. I went to bed with the light still on. Rule 2. I pulled out the plug from the socket and Poldy appeared. I didn't only feel his presence, he always gave me a clear sign. I heard knock, knock at the other side of the room. Rule 3. Poldy then began to walk towards my bed. I had to put the plug back in the socket before he reached my bed. Poldy had to reach my bed before I put the plug back in. That was the game. If Poldy reached my bed first, he won. He shook my bed, and the game began again. If I put the plug in first, I won. Poldy disappeared when the light came on. He didn't return. We played this game every night for a long time, perhaps 2 years. Poldy usually won a number of times each night. I laughed a lot when we played. It was a very happy game. And then something went wrong. I don't know what, and I don't know how, but something went wrong. Very wrong. Chapter 3. A Game of Chess. Your move, Louis said. My move, I answered. I've just moved. No, Louis said. I've just moved. It's your move. He pointed at the chessboard. Don't be silly, Louis, I said sharply. I know when I've moved, and I know when I haven't moved. Well, you haven't moved, and it's your move, Louis repeated. You aren't watching the game, William. The game? I cried suddenly. Which game? Who told you about the game? What do you know about the game? I've never told anyone about the game. It's my secret. Do you understand? It's my secret. Just Poldy and I. I was shouting. I could hear my voice. I stopped suddenly. Louis was looking at me strangely. Is there anything that you want to tell me, William? Eh? What? Is there anything that you want to tell me? There's something on your mind. There isn't anything on my mind, I said, thinking I must be more careful. I looked up at Louis. You're right, I said. There is something on my mind. It's this new Filbert Wiley story. It's on my mind all the time. It's a story about a game. The game's on my mind. I'm sorry I spoke like that a minute ago. That's all right, Louis said kindly. Your story sounds very interesting. But now we're playing a game of chess. Yes, I must think about that, I said. Who is this Poldy? Louis asked. Poldy? I cried. What do you know about Poldy? Who told you about Poldy? I could hear my angry voice again. I was shouting. Again, I stopped suddenly. I'm sorry, I said. You told me about Poldy, William, Louis said. A minute ago you said, just Poldy and I, Did I say that? I asked. Yes, Louis said. I know you very well, William. You haven't got many friends. Is this Poldy a new friend? Poldy is a very unusual name, isn't it? It is an unusual name, I said. I'll tell you about Poldy if you want to hear about him. Poldy is only a character in my new Filbert Wiley story. What sort of character? I don't know. He's a playful character. He plays all kinds of jokes. I mean, is he good or bad? Louis asked. Oh, he's good, I said immediately. A very, very nice, person. He's kind and funny, and I like him a lot, but... Yes? Well, sometimes I think he's bad, too. Poldy's character isn't clear in my mind. Sometimes I think he's evil. You know, very evil.
Evil? But you said he's funny and kind and playful.
That's an interesting point, I said. Tell me, Louis, can a person be evil and funny and kind and playful at the same time? What do you think?
I've never thought about it, Louis said.
I'll tell you about Poldy if I can, I said. I'll try to tell you. Poldy, suddenly, I heard a loud knock-knock from upstairs. Louis and I were in the living room. The living room is below my bedroom. The knock-knock came from my bedroom.
"What's the matter, William?" Louis asked. "Your face is white. You were telling me about Poldy."
Did you hear a knock, Louis? I asked. Like this. I picked up a wooden chess piece and knocked on the table. Like a wooden leg on the floor. Like a man with a wooden leg.
"No, of course not," Louis said. "I didn't hear anything."
But it came from upstairs.
"No, it's very quiet in here."
Then I probably imagined it.
"Yes," Louis answered. "You imagined it. You're a writer, William, and you live in your imagination. But you must be careful. Imagination can be dangerous."
In what way dangerous?
"Well, it can rule your life. You're working too hard. You don't go out enough. You have an uninteresting life. In the real world, I mean. You're in your study all day. You're alone in this big house. Then at night you sleep, and the next day you're in your study again. You need friends. You need the air and the sky and the sun. You don't live as a person, but only through your imagination. And that's dangerous, because adventures in the mind can rule your life. You start to think this Poldy is a real person. But he's only a character in one of your stories. He's just like Filbert Wiley. He isn't real. He doesn't exist."
"Oh, but he does exist."
"Yes, but only in your mind."
"So he exists and is real. Hamlet was one of Shakespeare's characters. But he exists. He's real. Queen Elizabeth I existed. She was alive and she ruled England. But she's not more real than Hamlet. Don't you think that Hamlet is a real person? Like Queen Elizabeth was a real person? I mean, they're both real persons in our minds."
"That's an interesting point," Louis said. "Things can exist in the mind or in the real world. So the character in your story, this Poldy, is real to you. And I'm real to you in the same way. Right?"
"Right," I said.
"I always knew you were a thinker, William," Louis said. "Now, let's get back to this game of chess. It's your move."
"My move? I've just moved."
"Let's not start that again. Look, we'll go through the moves from the beginning. I'm white and you're black, right?"
"Right." Louis went through the game from the beginning.
"We've both moved 14 times, Louis said. I'm white, so I moved first. Now I've just moved again. That's the 15th move, and it's your move."
I looked at the chessboard hard for a long time. "You're right," I said. "I wasn't watching the game."
"Yes, I told you that," Louis answered. "Your mind's on other things."
"Well, I'm looking at the game now, and I don't like it. It's gone wrong."
"Not for me, but for you," Louis said.
"Yes," I answered. "Something's wrong. Very wrong. I can't do anything about it." I moved my king. Louis immediately moved his queen. He picked up the big wooden chess piece and put it down hard on the chessboard. It hit the board with a loud knock.
"You can't move anywhere," Louis said loudly. I'm afraid you've lost the game.
I looked at the chessboard. You're right, I said. I can't move the king anywhere.
You didn't play very well, Louis said. You didn't play your usual game.
I know, I answered.
Do you know why? Louis asked.
No, why? Tell me.
Because your mind wasn't on the game. Your mind was on this character, Poldy. I didn't win. Poldy won.
How?
Because he rules your mind. Thinkers and writers must live too. Their ideas mustn't rule their lives.
You're right, Louis, I said. Louis looked at his watch.
He said. It's 10 to 12. It's late. I must go. He got up. Thanks for the game, William. Good night, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Louis, I said. Good night. I got up and suddenly knocked the chessboard off the table. It hit the floor and the pieces went across the room.
You've really lost the game now, Louis laughed.
Chapter 4. The Game Goes Wrong. That game of chess was about 5 years ago. Of course, I've played chess with Louis once a week since then. I'll have a game with him tomorrow. But I've described that game of chess because I remember it in detail. At that time, my game with Poldy was beginning to go wrong. This didn't happen suddenly. Oh no. It happened slowly, very slowly. I didn't really notice it at first. Louis never spoke to me about Poldy again, and of course I never spoke about Poldy. Louis believed that Poldy was a character in my detective story. He doesn't know that Poldy really exists. Poldy doesn't exist only in my mind or in my imagination, but he exists in the real world. He lives in my room. Sometimes I don't think of it as my room, but as Poldy's room. I nearly forgot to be careful that night with Louis. I talked about Poldy, and that was wrong. I know that Poldy heard me. The loud knock-knock from upstairs was a message. Of course, Louis didn't hear it because it was a message for me. Poldy was saying, "Be quiet, William. This is our secret, remember?" So I've been very careful since then. I never speak about my work, because I don't want Louis to ask any questions about Poldy. Things began to go wrong, and this happened little by little. I first noticed it about 2 months before the game of chess with Louis. One night, Poldy and I were playing our usual game. I pulled the plug out of its socket, and the room was dark. I always feel that Poldy is there. After that, he gives me a clear sign of his presence. Sometimes he knocks on the floor, sometimes on the window. Sometimes he shakes my bed. But that night, Poldy didn't give me a sign. I felt he was there. That was all. I sat up in bed and called to him. "Poldy, you're there, I know. I'm ready to play. Are you ready?" But nothing happened. I got out of bed and walked round the room. I walked very quietly across the wooden floor. My footsteps were very light, but I could hear them. Suddenly, I thought Poldy was behind me. I stopped and turned round. Of course, I didn't see anything. I walked up and down the room and stopped suddenly a number of times. Poldy was following me. I stood and listened. Then I heard a soft knock on the floor. It was right behind me. It got louder and louder. I turned round. and it stopped. I was angry. "What are you doing, Poldy?" I asked. "You're not playing the game. Are you going to play the game or aren't you?" "Very well," I said. "I'm going to punish you. I'm going back to bed. I'm going to put the plug in and send you away. I'm going to punish you." I climbed back into bed. "I'll try again," I said. "Do you want to play or not?" Again, nothing happened. "I'll count up to 3, I said. I counted slowly. 1, 2, 3. I reached over the side of the bed and touched the floor with my hand. I found the cord, but suddenly the cord began to move through my hand. I held it and pulled, but Poldy pulled too. I pulled with one hand and I tried to find the plug with the other. I was nearly on the floor now. I found the plug and pushed it in. The light came on, and Poldy wasn't there. I switched off the light from the switch, but lay awake for a long time. My heart was going wildly. That's funny, I thought. Why doesn't he play? He's like a little boy. Perhaps he wants to change the rules. He's playing jokes. But in my heart, I knew Poldy wasn't playing jokes. I then made my third important discovery. Something was wrong with our game. After that, it was never the same again. The next night, I was afraid. This was the first time that I felt fear in my games with Poldy. I couldn't pull the plug out. I lay in bed for a long time with the light on. I was really afraid. At last I was ready. What's going to happen, I thought, when I pull the plug out? But Poldy didn't play any jokes. We played our usual happy game. I enjoyed it, and Poldy enjoyed it. For many nights after that, we played our game. Well, perhaps I've made a mistake, I thought. Nothing has changed. Poldy was only playing jokes that night. But I was wrong. I had a very bad night before my game of chess with Louis, the game that I've already described. There was a full moon that night, so I didn't close the curtains. I always closed the curtains, but not this time. The room was full of light. My light was on when I got into bed. After a short time, I pulled the plug out. I was ready to begin the game. But nothing happened. Poldy gave no sign. He was there, of course. I sat in bed and waited. I could see the full moon through my window. There were dark shadows on the floor. There were shadows on the walls. I could hear a cat outside. It was crying like a baby. I don't like that noise. I got up and opened the window. "Shh!" I cried. The cat stopped. Then it started again. "Shh!" I cried again. I saw the cat, a fat black one. It ran across the garden. Good, I thought. I went back to bed. "Are we going to play or aren't we?" I asked. I could see the room clearly. I could see the chair with my clothes on it. I could see the big wardrobe in the corner of the room. I looked at the wardrobe. I looked at it for a long time. Suddenly, the wardrobe door began to open very quietly. Just a little at first. Then, more and more. Soon, it was wide open. I keep my clothes in the wardrobe. I haven't got many clothes, because I don't need them. There are a few shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, 2 suits, and an old coat. The wardrobe door was wide open, so I could see inside. I saw my shirts, my suits, and a coat. Then my coat began to move. It stepped outside the wardrobe. It stood in front of the wardrobe door. "Poldy," I said slowly. Poldy, or the coat, didn't listen to me. It stood there like a person without a head or legs or hands. Then it began to walk towards me. After a few slow steps, it put up an arm and shook it at me. I was angry with Poldy. "I've had enough of your silly jokes," I cried. "I'm going to punish you. I'm going to send you away. If you won't play, then I must punish you." I reached over the side of the bed and picked up the plug. It was easy to find in the moonlight. "See?" I asked, and held up the plug. "I'm going to put it in the socket now, and you're going to go away." The coat moved suddenly towards me. An arm reached for the plug and took it from my hands. The cord went through my fingers, and the light fell onto the floor. I got up angrily. The coat dropped the plug and went back into the wardrobe quickly. The wardrobe door shut with a loud noise. I picked up the light and put it back onto the bedside table. Then I went towards the wardrobe. I opened it a little. I put my hand inside and felt the clothes. My coat was in its place. I could feel it. It was soft and empty. I pulled the wardrobe door open and looked inside. It was empty, quite empty. There was no sign of Poldy. "I see," I said. "You want me to close the curtains before we play." I went to the window and looked out. The black cat was there again. It was still crying like a baby. "Shh!" I shouted, but it didn't stop. I put my hand on the curtain. And then I noticed something. Someone was standing behind the curtain. I could clearly see the shape of a person behind the curtain. I tried to close it, but I couldn't. The person didn't let me. "Oh," I shouted angrily, "this is stupid!" I went back to bed, and the curtain moved across the window. Now the room was in complete darkness. "So you want to play now?" I said. There was no answer, of course, just the sound of the cat outside the window. I reached for the plug on the floor, found it, and put it in the socket. The light came on. Poldy wasn't there. Again, I lay awake for a long time. That was a bad game, I thought. A very bad game. While I lay there, I could hear my heart. It was going wildly. And I could hear the cat outside. It never stopped. It cried like a baby all night. Chapter 5. Good Games and Bad Games. In the past 5 years, until the present time, I've continued to play games with Poldy. We've played every night. We've played good games and bad games. I've already described the good games. They're very simple and always fun. I'm happy when I'm playing good games, but I'm sad when I'm playing bad ones. In what way is a good game different from a bad game, you will ask? Well, I've already described a few bad games. Perhaps you've noticed that in a bad game, there are no rules. Anything can happen. And another thing,
When I'm playing a good game, I'm never afraid. But when I'm playing a bad game, my heart is full of fear. The bad games are like an evil message. I want to describe some of the games in the past 5 years. At the beginning, at the time of that game of chess with Louis, we didn't play many bad games. But after a time, we played a good game one night and a bad game the next night. This was true until 2 years ago. And this is when I began to worry. Worry and fear were always present in my life. Why did Poldy begin to play bad games? I've often asked myself this question, and I've never been able to explain why. I've thought of many different reasons. Perhaps you can think of a few reasons. But it isn't easy to be sure. At first, I thought Poldy was jealous. Perhaps he was jealous when I won a game, so I decided to lose for a time. But he still wanted to play bad games. Perhaps Poldy wanted to punish me. Why did he want to do that? I thought about this a lot. Perhaps Poldy was angry because I told Louis about him. But I didn't tell Louis anything. Louis thinks Poldy is a character in one of my detective stories. He doesn't know he's a ghost, a poltergeist. And the bad games began a long time before I said anything to Louis. Who is Poldy? I've often thought about this too. If I learn the answer to this question, perhaps I'll have the answer to my first question. Why does he want to play bad games? But I can't find the answer. I've often asked myself, is Poldy the ghost of my dead wife? Is Poldy really Julie? I think the answer to this question is no. Poldy has never given me any sign. For example, there's a photo of Julie on my bedroom wall. Poldy has never shaken it or moved it. I've kept one of Julie's dresses. It's a beautiful party dress. It's in my wardrobe. Poldy has never touched it. He's often taken my clothes out of the wardrobe. If Poldy is Julie, he or she can easily give me a sign. Julie loved me, and I loved her. So I don't think Poldy is Julie. But I'm not really sure. Is Poldy just part of my imagination? No, 1,000 times no. Why? Because all these things really happen. I don't imagine them. They are facts. Poldy exists. Little by little, Poldy and I played more and more bad games. Then I began to worry. I only wanted to play good games. How could I escape bad ones? I tried to escape them in a number of ways. I'll describe some of these ways to you. I always know when we're going to play a bad game. I can feel evil in the air before the game begins. Then there's one thing that I always try to do. I try to pull the plug out and put it back immediately. In this way, Poldy doesn't have time to play. He goes away when the plug goes back in. Poldy was surprised when I first did this. It worked very well. But now, he stops me. He knows when I'm going to try. Here's another way I've tried to escape bad games. Remember, Poldy only haunts my bedroom. He never haunts another part of the house. I've tried to sleep in other rooms in my house, but I can't escape a bad game like that. One night, I slept in my study. I had a strange dream. I dreamt that I was sleeping in my study. In my dream,
I got up and went to my bedroom. I sat in my own bed and read a book with the light on. In my dream, I pulled the plug out, and then suddenly I woke up. I wasn't in my study when I woke up, but in my bedroom. I was reaching over the side of the bed. The plug was in my hand. I walked to my bedroom in my sleep. Poldy did this. He pulled me back to the bedroom through my dream. I tried another thing. I tried not to play the game. One night, I sat in bed with the light on. Then, I turned the light off from the switch. Of course, this is always the rule. Poldy didn't appear. I went to sleep easily. But during the night, I suddenly woke up and switched on the light. I don't know why. I had to. Then I pulled the plug out, and the game began. This happened a number of times. You will ask me, why don't you sell your house and go away? I've asked myself this question too. The fact is, I can't. I've often thought about it, but I can't do it. I've tried another thing. I've left my house at night and gone to a hotel. But when I do this, I can't sleep. I always leave the hotel during the night. I pay the bill at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and go home. It isn't easy to leave a hotel at 4 in the morning. Try it and see. After that, I go to bed and play a game with Poldy. So you see, I can never escape a game. Poldy always finds a way to bring me back to my bedroom. Until a year ago, we often played a lot of bad games. But Poldy never touched me at any time. I often tried to touch him, but he never touched me. This was a kind of rule. I can't describe my fear when Poldy first touched me. It all happened one night about a year ago. I went to bed at 11 o'clock. I knew it was going to be a bad night and not a good night. I could feel it. I read for hours because I didn't want to pull the plug out. In the end, I was very sleepy, but of course I couldn't sleep. I reached over the side of the bed in my usual way and pulled the plug out. Immediately my eyes were wide open and I was awake. Poldy was there and we were ready for the game. During a bad game, Poldy doesn't always give a clear sign of his presence, but that night he gave a very clear sign. I lay in bed in fear and waited. Nothing happened for a minute, and then the bed began to move. Poldy wasn't shaking the bed. He was lifting it off the floor. The bed moved into the air. I reached over the side and tried to touch the floor. I tried to find the plug, but I couldn't reach the floor. The bed was, I think, about a meter above the floor. Then the bed began to turn round, slowly at first. It went round and round and round, first slowly, then faster and faster and faster and faster. Suddenly, it stopped in the air and dropped to the floor quickly. It touched the floor lightly and was in its usual place. The head of the bed was against the wall with the bedside table next to me. I tried to reach the plug. I touched the floor with my fingers and found it. I tried to put it back, and then Poldy hit my hand sharply. I dropped the plug in fear. For the first time, he touched me, and he hit me. I lay back in bed. The room was quiet. The bed didn't move. Then I felt something above my head. It was like a bird. I put my hand above my head. There was nothing there. Then something touched my hair lightly, like a soft hand. Fingers went lightly through my hair. I jumped out of bed and ran to the other side of the room. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned round. Poldy was behind me. I turned round again and again, but Poldy was always behind me. Then he hit me in the face. Then he began to push me. He gave me a little push at first. He pushed my face softly. After that, he began to push my arms and legs very hard. I kicked and shouted, but I couldn't stop him. I jumped back into bed, and you will never believe it. Poldy bit my face very hard. I cried out in pain. I reached over the side of the bed and touched the floor. I touched it wildly to find the plug. At last, the plug was in my hand. I tried to find the socket. I touched the wall with my fingers, but in my fear I couldn't find it. "Please, please," I shouted. "Where is it? Where's the socket?" Someone or something tried to pull the plug out of my hand. But in my fear I was strong, stronger than Poldy. I pushed the plug in hard. The light came on, and suddenly I was alone. "Ah," I cried. My heart went wildly, and my body shook in fear. That was a very bad night. It was the first time that Poldy ever touched me. After that, he often touched me. Sometimes he touched softly with his fingers. Sometimes he pushed me, hit me, or kicked me. It wasn't just a bad game now. It was a dangerous game. We began to play more and more bad games. I've already told you that. But the number of bad games and good games was the same. That was true a year ago. But after Poldy touched me the first time, something changed. We never played another good game. During the past year, we've played only bad games every night. All our games are bad, but they're not all the same. Some are just bad. Others are very, very bad and very dangerous. Poldy has become completely evil. He only shows me the evil side of his character. My bedroom is an evil place. It's evil in the daytime. It's evil when Poldy isn't there. It's evil all the time. What can I do? I don't know. I just don't know. Until a month ago, I was all right during the day. I went to my study every day and wrote. This took my mind off Poldy. I thought of new adventures for Filbert Wiley, and I enjoyed doing this. But during the past month, I haven't been able to work. I still come to my study every day, but I sit at my desk and look out of the window. I don't write anything. I sleep very little. I eat very little. I'm thin and weak. But today, I'm writing. I'm writing these words. I'm writing quickly before it's too late. I have to write this story of my life with Poldy before it's too late. You will ask, why don't you tell Louis about this? Louis still comes on Wednesdays, and we still play chess. I never play chess well now, and he always wins. I'm always tired and worried.
"What's the matter with you, William?" Louis asked last week. "I can't understand. You're ill. You must see a doctor. I'm worried about you. If you don't call a doctor, I'll call one."
Of course, Louis mustn't call a doctor. "Listen," I said, "I know I'm not very well, but I'll be better soon. I'm writing a very strange story about Filbert Wiley. I'll be better when I finish the story. I know I will. So please don't call a doctor. Do you promise?"
"All right, William," Louis said. "I promise."
Louis is a good friend. I know he'll keep his promise. Have I tried to tell Louis about Poldy? Yes, I have. Many times. But every time I try, I can't speak. I've tried to ask Louis to stay in the house with me for a night, but again, I can't. When I try to open my mouth, I can't. Then I always hear that knock, knock from the room above. I always hear a message from Poldy. The words, "It's our secret," come into my head. Perhaps a real voice speaks these words. Perhaps it's Poldy's voice. It speaks kindly, but there's always a message in the voice. One Wednesday, about 2 months ago, I was playing chess with Louis. I was very tired, after a very bad night. I tried to play chess, and I didn't think of Poldy, but Louis suddenly remembered the name Poldy and spoke to me during the game.
"William," Louis said, "I was in a bookshop the other day, and I was looking at your books, the Filbert Wiley stories. I remember once, about 5 years ago, you spoke to me about a new character. You called this character Poldy. I've never forgotten his name because it's a strange name. I don't like the name, but I've always remembered it. I bought all your books from the last 5 years and took them home. I read them all and enjoyed them, but I didn't find this character Poldy in any of them."
My face was white. Poldy was knocking hard on the floor of the room above. I could hear it, but Louis couldn't. In the end, I said, "Yes, Louis, I didn't use that character in my story. I changed the story."
"Why?" Louis asked. "I remember he was an interesting character, good and evil at the same time."
"No!" I shouted. "He's evil! Evil! Only evil!" The knock on the floor above was louder and louder. It was like a wild dance. I heard the message and stopped shouting. "I'm sorry," I said in a quiet voice. "No, I didn't use that character. I couldn't say the name Poldy." We continued to play chess. The game ended in the usual way. Louis said, "You can't move anywhere," and I lost. Louis said good night and left. That night, Poldy really punished me. He pushed me, kicked me, and hit me. The funny thing is, you could never see any signs of this punishment on my body. I'm often in great pain, but it never shows on my body. Then, I made my fourth important discovery. Poldy didn't like Louis. He didn't want him to come to my house. He wanted to be alone with me all the time. The games on Tuesday nights, the nights before Louis came, were always very, very bad. I don't enjoy Tuesday evenings now. I'm afraid of Tuesday nights. And it's Tuesday today.
End of CD 1.